The blood was already drying when Jacob understood that this time there would be no running. It clung to the stones outside the city gate, dark and sticky beneath the early sun. Soaking into the dust of a land he hoped would finally be quiet. The cries had stopped. The swords had been cleaned. The bodies lay still. And the silence that followed was heavier than any scream. This was not the silence of peace. It was a silence after something irreversible. Jacob stood apart from the city, his staff pressed into the earth, his limp pronounced, his face drawn tight with horror and disbelief. He had faced God in the darkness and lived. He had faced Esau in daylight and been spared. But this was something else entirely. This was his sons. This was his legacy. This was Dinah. It had not begun with blood. It never did. It began with curiosity. After the long road from Paddan Aram, after the fear of Esau and the fragile relief of reconciliation, Jacob had wanted rest more than anything. A place to pitch tents. A place where the flocks could graze and the children could breathe without fear. Shechem had seemed safe enough. Fertile land, welcoming people, a city that traded instead of raided. Jacob purchased land, built an altar, spoke the name of God aloud in a place where it was not known. For a moment, it felt like a rival. Dinah had grown up in the shadow of tents and brothers. The only daughter among sons, her world was loud, protective, suffocating. She watched life on the edges, men bargaining, women cooking, children running in the dust. She listened more than she spoke. She learned to move quietly. She was not reckless. She was not naive. She was curious. One morning, when the camp stirred slowly and the sun rose warm and unthreatening, Dinah slipped beyond the boundary of her family's tents. Not to rebel, not to provoke, only to see, to know, to touch a world that was not defined by brothers and flocks and fear. Shechem, the city, hummed with life. Women moved through the streets carrying water and baskets. Children laughed. Merchants shouted prices. Dinah felt invisible among them, and for the first time, free. And then she was seen. Shechem, son of Hamor, prince of the land, noticed her not as a person but as a possession he wanted. Power had taught him that desire was permission. That taken was the same as choosing. What happened next would be debated, softened, reworded, justified by some and condemned by others. But Dinah's life would never be divided into before and after again without pain. He violated her. No warning, no consent, no mercy. When it was over, Dinah's body remained, but something else had been taken too. Her safety, her voice, her place in the world as she understood it. She did not scream. She did not fight. She endured. And when it was done, Shechem spoke of love. He spoke gently, offered marriage, promised honor, as if words could undo violence, as if desire could erase terror, as if power could be forgiven simply because it decided to stay. Dinah returned to her father's camp broken in ways no one could see at first glance. Her clothes were straightened, her hair covered, her eyes empty. Jacob heard. He felt the weight of it crush into his chest like a stone. But he did nothing, not immediately, not because he did not care, but because he was afraid. Afraid of the city, afraid of retaliation, afraid of war, afraid of losing everything he had built in the fragile aftermath of Esau, afraid of being surrounded by enemies with children and wives who would pay the price. Jacob waited, and in that waiting, something dangerous began to grow. Dinah's brothers heard. Simeon and Levi heard first, and what entered them was not grief. It was fire, a white-hot, blinding fury that had no patience for diplomacy, no tolerance for delay. Their sister had been defiled, their bloodline shamed, their honor crushed beneath a prince's appetite. Judah clenched his fists and said nothing. Reuben looked away. The younger brothers watched and learned. Hamor came to Jacob with words smooth as oil. He spoke of alliances, of marriages, of shared land. He spoke as if Dinah were a bargaining chip, not a wound, as if the violation were a misunderstanding to be negotiated away. Shechem stood beside him, eager, pleading, promising devotion. Jacob listened. Simeon and Levi planned. They spoke softly, smiled politely, agreed publicly. Yes, they said, we can be one people. But only if every man in the city submitted. Circumcision, a sign of covenant twisted into a weapon. Hammer agreed. Shechem agreed. The men of the city agreed, because they trusted the promise of peace and the promise of gain. 3 days later, when pain slowed them and strength drained from their bodies, Simeon and Levi came with swords. They did not hesitate. They did not ask questions. They killed every male in the city, princes, merchants, boys barely old enough to shave, men who had not touched Dinah, men who had trusted a covenant they did not understand. Blood ran through streets where children had laughed days earlier. Cries echoed off stone walls until there were no voices left to cry. Simeon and Levi took Dinah from Shechem's house. They looted, they burned, they left nothing untouched. And when they returned to the camp, sword still red, Jacob finally spoke. His voice was not loud. It was broken. "You have brought trouble on me," he said. "You have made me a stench to the people of the land. They will gather against us and kill us all." Simeon and Levi looked at him with eyes still blazing. Should have treated our sister like a prostitute? The words hung in the air, sharp and unanswerable. Jacob had no response, because they were right, and they were wrong. Dinah stood behind them, unseen, unheard. The men argued over honor and fear and survival, but no one asked her what she needed. No one asked her what justice looked like now. That night, Jacob could not sleep. He walked alone again, as he always did when the weight became unbearable. His limp slowed him, forced him to feel every step. He remembered the man at the river, the touch, the blessing, the new name, Israel, one who wrestles with God. But tonight, God was silent. Jacob looked back at the camp, at the sons who had become tribes, already stained with blood, at the daughter whose life had been shattered between men's choices, at the future that now felt poisoned. He had wanted peace. He had wanted safety. Instead, he had found a truth he could no longer escape. Forgiveness does not prevent violence. Fear allows it. The land around Shechem would never forget what happened. Neither would Jacob's sons. Neither would Dinah. The massacre marked them all. And as Jacob gathered his family and prepared to move again, deeper into uncertainty, he knew this story was not over. Because blood cries out. Because violence begets violence. Because the sons who learn that justice comes from the edge of the sword would one day turn that sword on one another. And because Dinah's silence would echo through generations, unanswered, unresolved, waiting. The road stretched forward once more. Ahead, God's command came again. Return to Bethel. Yet sorrow shadowed the path. Rachel would die giving birth to Benjamin, and Isaac's life would end, leaving Jacob to carry grief, legacy, and the fragile hope of what remained.